the amount of destruction they describe there is kind of big for a
Yeah.
crowded area. So there's no way that people got away like unscathed. So then I just have this image of like Lulu just like this shit-eating grin while she's eating ice cream surrounded by dead people.
No. Welcome to Casuals of Runeterra, Part 5 of our Star Guardian special. I'm your host, Ryan, here with your other host, Hedge.
This is no longer even a Runeterra lore podcast. We only exist for Star Guardian now. It's all consuming.
Riot made sure of that. Shit. I mean, okay, so if you guys have noticed, we've been hitting you with part, back to back to back. And we took a day or two, right, to regather ourselves, figure out the rest of the content, because as you know, from the first 4 parts, we got you up to speed if you were, coming into the year 2022. And now we're going to give you the rest of it, which is the stuff that Riot recently released. So we're going to take our time to work through that because, as we mentioned, it's broken into 2 parts. We're getting some stuff now. There's going to be some stuff in a couple weeks that's going to come out in addition. So we want to get you caught up to that as well. But the first thing we have to do, as in every episode, is housekeeping. So, as always, you can listen to us everywhere. If you're listening to us somewhere, if you want to move somewhere else, we're there. You can contact us at podcastcore@gmail.com. Visit us at podcastcore.com for all of our info, and then follow us on any platform or all the platforms because that helps with discoverability and we appreciate it. And then leave a like, a comment, short review. We like reading those. But the easiest way is word of mouth to tell one friend to learn the proper form for throwing a pix by listening to the Casuals of Runeterra podcast.
I'm excited to dig into that detail because that is one of the best things that they've done with Lulu, like in the entirety of Star Guardian so far.
I love how we asked the question on the last episode and they gave us the answer.
Yep. Which, is a perfect segue into, if you haven't listened to our previous parts yet, you're gonna be lost because this is picking up kind of like on the heels of our last story in essence. So, listen to our previous parts so that you're caught up with us and then we can all enjoy the story together. And you can listen to us ask why they got to do Lulu so bad and then they fix it in this episode. Yay.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're a cool kid who just happened to be like, yeah, I knew all that stuff. I just picked this episode randomly and turns out I'm up to date. Then welcome. So for people who've listened to other parts or if it's been a while and you haven't looked at Star Guardian content, the last parts, the quick recap is we had the intro to the main team in part 1. In part 2, we covered Camp Targon. In part 3, we did the slumber party and also some bios for the veteran team. And then in part 4, we did the park incident and then went over the popular music video that came out that kind of is more like an Ari Gaiden type situation, a side story of something going on that kind of overlaps with what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, like none of the things that we've covered so far has just been miscellaneous. Like this is all kind of piecing together. And we just have been open-ended about it because this is stuff that's dropping on us now after years of speculation. So we're finally getting the whole story together, which is why we're all really excited to keep up with it. And this is why it's now a Star Guardian podcast. And it's like, yeah, no, we're going to read it all right now. We got you covered. We'll read it for you. Because I know I can't stop reading it, so yay.
So let's get into it. The Twin Stars is the name of this story, and the way this is broken up, we're going to have more parts. We're going to make it easy on you. We're just going to keep doing our parts the way we've been doing it, but when we tell this story, this is going to be a multiple episode type thing. because of the way they decided to release it in chapters.
And, you know, if you want us to do it differently, hit us up at podcastcore@gmail.com. If you want a like 2.5 hour episode of us reading a single story, we can do it, but we need the feedback.
A feature-length film coming out soon.
Oh my God. Take your intermission now. Start playing intermission music.
So today we're going over part 1, which is before Twilight, and that's broken into a couple chapters. So we'll start with the prologue. So this story starts off with a recent beat-up middle school-aged Akali. And, she missed a payment with a mob boss and had to be taught a valuable lesson. So you can tell from the beginning that this already takes a different turn.
Yeah, it takes such a different turn that I don't even know what you're talking about. Like,
just looking at me like, wait, what?
I'm scrolling on my phone right now. What paragraph is that?
What did I read? So no, she was protecting a homeless puppy from being harassed by a bunch of psycho kids. You know how they get. And then she kind of got jumped by these kids, and a young Kaisa intervenes, and she breaks up the scuffle. And then she kind of puts those kids in her place, saying, if you ever harm this girl or this or anything else ever again, you'll feel my wrath. And she gets kind of scuffed up as well. And then she goes off to both help Akali up and then dig through the mountain of trash to find that mucked up puppy.
Yeah, and we get a lot as far as like not so much a lot, but we're given a picture of how both of these characters are as children. So we know that Akali kind of does like the thing that she wants, but she's kind of viewed more as a delinquent. And we know that from the way that she reacts when she realizes it's Kaisa that showed up and broke up the party. And it's because it's, beautiful, perfect, well-behaved Kaisa is how she's kind of spelling it out. So this very much is like a tip of the hat to your traditional Japanese storytelling of like the way that school kids are, of just the delinquent outcast, but the perfect student council representative. And you can literally pick up any slice of life anime and that story will be there. So
yeah, kids in middle school don't tend to be well-rounded yet.
Not at all.
It works.
Not at all.
So this is the first time they actually get to talk. And like Hetch mentioned, Kaisa's kind of seen as Little Miss Perfect. Akali's pitched this opposite of that foil, or she's the foil to Kaisa, right? And then, as they're trying to figure out what to do with this puppy, Kaisa tells her, my parents run a shelter. They can, we can drop him off there, and I can help you get home. And she's like, of course, your parents also do shelter work, right? They're just as great as you are. And then we get a little snippet towards the end where we find out that Akali's home life is not that great. Her mother's abusive, and that's something that I'm sure we're going to get more of later in the story. But the twist here is that Kaisa is the first one to bring up that she immediately thinks of Akali as a friend after everything they've gone through in this moment. And that kind of makes Akali happy. And it's the first time she's felt that happiness in a long time that acts as almost a barrier when she goes home back to that abusive environment. She now has that good feeling, right?
Yeah, it's a nice little caveat or, a cherry on top of kind of, bringing in sour information. But really, there's not even a comparison to this, because this is just the traditional way that introverts make friends, is that an extrovert just kidnaps an introvert, says, you're my friend now. And then they're friends for best friends for life from that point onward. So like this is it. This is Riot's version of that. Akali is officially an introvert. All right. You can at me if you want, but that's how they wrote the story. I didn't make the call.
Yeah. So one thing I want to touch on, because we criticize. I mean, we criticize all the time, but usually good criticism. Now, there's one part here in the prologue that stood out to me, because this is the beginning of the news stories they're putting out. So obviously I had a keen eye on it. The way the dialogue's written for how Kaisa speaks to Akali is very adult. There's a certain level of wit and quippiness that the fact that they, start off with, hey, they're in middle school. Okay, middle schoolers don't have this kind of back and forth. They don't have this kind of dialogue, this kind of quippiness. It's almost like a comedic duo on stage.
Yeah, it very much is like it's too well put together. Like it's too
Yeah.
smart. Where like Akali's kind of snippiness in some of it is like a little bit more believable. Kaisa is like she's scripted, like which I think like maybe they were trying to convey that it is like that perfect student kind of mindset. But
Yeah.
come on, you know, no perfect middle schooler is going to be able to like kill it at the Apollo. Like no.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
save the quippiness for the next chapter. The next part when we get like towards high school, yeah, I'll believe it then.
Yeah. Now we're gonna get posted like, oh my God, they hate Riot. Like we did it. We balanced ourselves out.
Hey, we had to do it. Do you know how many sales of skins that we set up for them from, you know, the skins they put out like 5 years ago? Those sales are on us, baby.
Yeah. So part one is the actual story beginning, right? We have the fight. So we fast forward to a mall type situation. We're heading towards a mall, or in the Japanese sense, they're more like strip malls, open air kind of thing. There's a crowd in the way, and there's Akali and Kaisa having an argument out loud. And they kind of go back and forth about Kaisa essentially burning herself out, quote unquote. Akali playing it down as you're not really burnt out. It's just that you're stretching yourself too thin to help people. And then Kaisa thinks Akali is mad that she actually wants to help people. And this makes her emotional and she starts to cry. And against her better judgment, Akali kind of separates herself from the discussion and the fight rather than trying to resolve things then and there. And she heads deeper into the mall without her.
Yeah, and this is like this is a really good way of like showing that like some time has passed, but like their characters are still the same, which is, you know, Kaisa is an overachiever, so she's burning the candle at both ends, trying to hold up the image that she believes that she needs to hold up. And Akali is still not really fully understanding a lot of like the social dynamics, like as far as for being friends, that exchange of, you know, like trying to care for someone
Yeah.
and, you know, like uh, conveying those worries does take communication, and like the longer you push it off, the harder it's going to be. And so it's like, you know, that kind of goes into that whole introvert thing of just, you know, Kaisa pulled Akali up off the ground. It's like, you're my friend now. So Akali doesn't really know how to do this, but we do get like some little tidbits here of Akali kind of beating herself up for not taking a stronger stance and nipping it in the bud right then and there. And we do get a little bit of information of how they do kind of view themselves as a crime fighting duo through their friendship over the years. So it's probably like we know that it's more of the thing of like kind of delinquency or like, you know, chasing delinquents, because it's mentioned that it's to keep Akali out of trouble as well as doing the right thing, which is what Kaisa wants to do anyways. So it's probably nothing major. I don't think that they're like superheroes at this point. Like, and once we get further into the story, we know they're not superheroes at this point, but like they do go out and try to find trouble and nip it in the bud. So like they're very active teenagers. So no
Yeah, they're in the
wonder.
do-gooder phase.
Yeah, and a do-gooder phase, very active. So no wonder Akali's like, "Yo, Kaisa, you gotta sleep.
Yeah.
you gotta sleep at some point."
Yeah, and as she gets into the mall, she ends up at a flower shop, which kind of reminds her about, you know, the importance of the relationship because they share some jewelry that has flowers on it, and it's, you know, a symbol for them. And there's an old woman who kind of, you know, looks at her being a child and says, you know, don't waste, almost like, don't waste your time being angry at this age, right? Whatever it is, it's not that big of a deal, which is classic being young. And then she decides to buy some flowers for Kaisa, which are her favorite. And this will kind of signify, you know, the strength of the relationship.
Yeah, and I mean that really is like something that teenagers always kind of need to hear at some points of their life. It's something that I know as an adult, every now and then I gotta hear it too. Of just like some things are not as big as your brain makes them out to be,
Yeah.
and then it's like, yeah, if you're still friends, it's fine. Just say you're sorry. Like they'll understand. Like y'all are friends. You'll get through it. Buy some flowers. $15. Did I say 15? It's actually 20. demand
Yeah,
went up.
inflation is through the roof right now. We don't want to date the episode, but future us, please help.
Please help. Wire me some money.
So this takes us to part 2, which is alone in a crowd. So we move to Lux's group at the mall, hanging out with Ari's group, minus Ari still, because as we mentioned in the last part, spoilers, she's missing, but only Sarah and Lux, as far as we know this. And then Syndra is also not here, which she's just extra sussy all the time. So it's classic that she's not around. So Sarah's kind of in deep thought and still concerned over the missing Ari, and Lux is checking in on her as Lux can't help but do. And then she reminds her that, she is holding up the team, right? She's like, okay, well, everyone else is here. We're good. The rest of the gang are up to shenanigans in the food court. So let's just, we're checking things out. We're hanging out. We're having a good time. There's even a scene where like Ezreal is pointing out he wants to go in this lamp shop, which once again is cheesy because they're feeding more into that whole light aspect and how he likes starlight and all this shenanigans.
What's your favorite light? Everyone has a favorite light. Now I do like, as far as coming back to the usual group that we have been watching, that we're finally looking at it from a different lens. Like at this point of the story, it's not from Lux's point of view, which is every other story has been from Lux's point of view. So it is refreshing not only to get someone else's perspective of the whole thing, but to also get into Miss Fortune's mind here, because we have only been able to gather and speculate from what Lux has been learning, and she has not been learning a lot. So it's nice to kind of get that little pat on the back of like, yeah, we were right. Like Miss Fortune was kind of struggling with whatever happened in the past and worried about Ari. So it's like, yeah, stressed out teenagers, but so it's nice to know that we were right leading up to that. And it's also kind of funny to watch her in a way. Her way of trying to unwind is like kind of encouraging Lux to go spend time with Ezreal, of just like, yeah, y'all go ahead and do this thing, whatever this is. And it's that vibe of whatever this is. I don't know what y'all are up to. Y'all seem like you like it though. I don't care. Just keep me out. Y'all do that.
Yeah, whatever they're up to, Jinx clearly is not appreciative of what's going on.
No, and that makes it very entertaining.
So as Hetch mentioned, Sarah's kind of stuck between trying to distract herself from the past trauma of losing her original team, which is something that's, boiled back up to the surface, and then the current worry of losing another team. Not just her new team because Ari's not around, but also this other team that's kind of dependent on them for being the veteran team. And then this takes us into part 3. There's a sudden, I forgot.
You're right. This does take us into part 3, because what happens at the very end here of like, yeah, this is, it's not just a nice little, oh, Sarah's worried, end of discussion. There's a gigantic explosion, and no one really sees where this explosion comes from, but they notice that all the coverings up top of this mall have disappeared, and they can see the sky, and there's a nearby flower stand that is just caught in this explosion. And you know what? I feel like we were just talking about flowers. So are we still part 3? Is that still following Sarah Fortune, or no? Oh yeah. Akali lives the Family Guy joke of I awoke several hours later in a daze.
And this chapter is called A Grand Entrance. So obviously Jin is there. And it's time for Act 4.
Oh my God. Don't do that. They'll make another Star Guardian skin for Jin, and it'll come out with 2 comics, and we're going to have to read those comics. You're only increasing our amount of work.
So it's not Jin, but Akali awaking, dazed and confused. trying to remember what she was doing and where she's at. And she realizes she was at the flower stand about to get some flowers. And then she's hearing now screaming and panic and looks up and sees these two individuals that look weird to her. And it's Rakan and Zaya. And they seem disappointed sarcastically that people aren't celebrating that they just destroyed this area to make their entrance. So they decide they have to destroy the city.
Look, if anyone is going to have the flair for dramatics as villains in this universe, name a better duo than Zaya and Rakan.
Yeah.
I'll wait. You can't. In fact, the closest that you got was naming Jin because he has a flair for dramatics, but there's no duo there, so I still win. And I hate you for bringing up Jin, but I mean, this is lovely to see because we've been waiting to get more details about Rakan and Zaya. So this is a return of characters that we wanted ever since the that last video that they had put out at this point almost 3 years ago. So it's perfect. This is exactly what we want. I can't wait to go into the next part. So take me there. Go to part 4. I'm ready. I need it. I want it in my bones.
Yeah, so part 4 is the meat and potatoes of this story. And it's Forgotten Friends is how this is labeled. So Sarah immediately jumps into action, and Lux and Jinx kind of follow up without much hesitation. They're not transformed yet. They're just moving into position. Ready Player One. So Poppy starts protecting Lulu, who's still eating ice cream. She's not really, you gotta remember, Lulu is usually aloof, or even if she knows what's going on, she doesn't treat things with the same kind of urgency. So she's finishing her ice cream while Poppy has her hammer out. And then John and Soraka are just helping panicking mall goers evacuate outside the mall. And then Sarah notices that the two people that crashed into the stand are her old group members, two of them specifically that we mentioned, but their eyes specifically look different or look wrong.
Yeah, and this is a great thing to see because it's, further confirmation that this is the previous team that we keep getting mentions of whenever we hear about Ari and Miss Fortune's backstories, period. So this finally confirmed, no doubt. Zaya and Rakan were with Ari and Miss Fortune's previous team. And then I just like to imagine them running to this, ground zero of an explosion. And the fact that Lulu's still eating her ice cream, I see it as like the emote from Runeterra of her, drinking her boba. But instead of boba, it's that face while she's eating her ice cream. And, there are probably like wounded people near this, like, because the amount of destruction they describe there is kind of big for a crowded area. So there's no way that people got away like unscathed. So then I just have this image of like Lulu just like this shit eating grin while she's eating ice cream surrounded by dead people.
No. Yeah, luckily we don't know if anybody died. We know people are evacuating. But listen, when we explain what happens later, people had to die during this. Okay, so
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's why it's so funny to me of just her just eating her ice cream, like.
Yeah, so it's not only that they look wrong. Sarah also looks confused because she thought these two died. Right, that was a big deal. That was something she told Lux, and to see them there is obviously shocking. And then there's this moment where a child kind of grabs onto her, like pulling her. And this helps bring her back to the moment because the child's lost and is just kind of crying, just wants help. And then she immediately is like, okay, she transforms in the middle of this, chaos. And then she yells for the others to do the same. At the same time is when the two, Rakan and Zaya, attack, right? And even though she's hesitant and kind of saddened, as well as her familiars, which are mentioned, that when she tells them to transform, they're kind of hesitant as well. But she reassures them that they're not the same friends we once knew. Sounds like she's trying to convince herself as well. And she immediately shoots down the first volley of feathers sent from Zaya, but didn't expect a second volley behind that. If you've played the game, always expect that. Uh, but for the second volley, Ezreal does his thing, teleporting in, knocking down the second volley. But then Rakan kind of sends his own feathers, and this actually almost critically wounds Ezreal. But then Jinx steps in and then lets off a storm of bullets in Rakan's direction, so he has to kind of shift.
Yeah, like this, the way that they're starting off this fight really does like use a lot less language to kind of paint the spirit of the fight. Specifically, since we are looking from Miss Fortune's perspective, because even though Miss Fortune's recognizing that their eyes are wrong, and she is telling herself that she saw her old friends die. She knows that they're gone, and even if somehow these are the same people, they're not the same anymore. So she knows that she has a job to do. She, like, they keep saying it's like she's telling herself this, but the fighting spells it out too, because she doesn't transform and goes to kill the imposters. She transforms and is fighting defensively. She's shooting down the feathers instead of attacking these invaders. And it's kind of transitioning to the other members as well. As Ezreal, you know, he shoots down the second volley, and Jinx comes in and is shooting down feathers too. Like, no one's actually trying to kill these two people. And we know, as far as like from our previous stories, from Lux's perspective, Lux, you know, loves the idea of being a Star Guardian, and she loves the idea of teaming up with other Star Guardians. So Lux is probably like, if we were in her mind, she's probably thinking of like, I don't know why they're confused, but they look like us. Like, they have powers like us. We should get them to help us instead of viewing them as a threat. So I think it's a really cool way that they've set up the fight to kind of tell that story of like, yeah, Miss Fortune's not buying what she's telling herself either. Like, she's trying just to keep herself and her friends safe instead of killing these people.
Yeah, and a shout out to our part 4 episode, so last episode, because we talked about the music video at the end of that episode and the way the movement's handled, the way that Zaya and Rakan fight as they were chasing Nico in that one. In this one, it gives you a good perspective when you have, okay, I've seen that visually. Now I'm reading this, and it makes sense how this fight is moving and the flow of it. And to continue the fight, so after, you know, Ezra intervenes, then Jinx intervenes, Rakan has to move out the way, so he dashes and changes direction and almost gets creamed by Poppy's hammer. And then as that's happening, Zaya decides to dash as she's dodging to go towards Lulu, because that's the classic move. It's in the playbook. It's the way we drew it up. It's like,
Yep, 100%.
It's like the Chicago Bulls in triangle offense. It's what you do. You go for Lulu. And this is the part where Lulu finishes her ice cream and she throws picks in her face.
I love this, all right, because they've like, Riot has been doing such a good job of, you know, making Lulu eccentric without being like the omega powerful Lulu that we know from regular Realm of Runeterra. But this is like perfect because there's not even a sense of urgency here still, and then she's not even really fighting. She's just chucking picks at people. And so then she's just an annoyance, which really, even in like League of Legends, a fed Lulu can carry the game. A not fed Lulu can still get their team to win the game because Lulu's the most annoying character on the planet. So this is perfect. Yeah, no, throw picks in the face. Get this stupid thing out of my face.
So then Lux actually ends up binding them both, which is the ability you've seen from the game. And then Lux, being naive, tries to ask them to stop this nonsensical fighting because, as Hetch mentioned, she's kind of as confused with less information. And at this point, Zaya mentions that Sarah abandoned them and let them die. Now, this is a big question mark, right? Because from what we've heard up to this point, she didn't abandon them. They fought kind of to the death type situations. So Zaya follows up by saying that, is this the lie that Ari keeps telling you? That we died, you know, on the battlefield in a natural situation without you guys leaving us behind. And that kind of leaves us like, oh shit, is there more to this story?
And it's really like kind of confusing because we saw in the previous video that they put out that Ari was present when at the time where Rakan and Zaya were, trying to kill Nico,
Yeah.
and Zoe is there, and Zoe reveals that, she has the power to corrupt Star Guardians. So Ari was present too. So it's like, okay, we know that Ari was there, and now we're kind of getting more of a vibe because Miss Fortune saying that she saw them die, but Miss Fortune wasn't in that video.
Yeah.
So was that like a different event that went down? Like there's leaves a lot of questions there. So all that we know for certain now is that the Rakan and Zaya standing before the Star Guardians now, they are different in some way, whether they're imposters or have been like fully corrupted and like are spiritually gone. We don't know that detail. And the only detail that we do know about this transformation is that they're really strong, because at this point they have been holding off 8 Star Guardians by themselves.
Yeah.
So 2v8 and nobody dropped. Like, yeah, they're really strong. So those are the only 2 facts that we know for certain.
Yeah, this is not authentic League of Legends here. This is definitely not how the game works.
Hey, I've played a couple games where it felt like it was 2v8. Okay, top laner dies, gives up first blood, and then teleports onto a minion that's already at the enemy tower. I've been there. I felt it. I have felt it.
Oh no. So at this point, Sarah's mind is doing gymnastics because she decides to aim her gun and decide the real ones did die and these ones aren't them. And I'm like, all right, sure. So that works for her. Zaya even pushes her buttons a bit more and tells her to keep lying to herself. And she fires, but Rakan dashes in, shielding Zaya like his move in League of Legends. And then Lux turns her attention to off to the side in this flower shop, this small shivering form that's in this wreckage of the flower shop, and it's a collie. And Sarah turns away to kind of help this girl after Lux prods her a bit and try to get her out of her own head. And then as she goes, Zaya yells at her again and then throws a feather, but John is able to knock that feather away, and Rakan leaps into action because he's always trying to keep Zaya safe despite what she's trying to do. And then Lulu, round 2, throws picks again. And even Rakan's like, stop throwing that damn thing at me.
Pix is MVP, all right? Like, I'm still just so happy that it's like Lulu's actually doing stuff instead of being a damsel in distress. Now we do, as far as with Miss Fortune running away, like a nice thing that we get there is that it does take some prodding from Lux to actually get Miss Fortune to realize that for her to go to the girl that is at this flower stand is the right thing to do. And Lux even points out that it's like, 1, you need to go save her. 2, you're too close to whatever this is.
Yeah.
And so it's really cool because it's like, we get to see Lux actually being a leader with some confidence, and it kind of catches everybody off guard because even Miss Fortune's going, did she just snap at me?
With gusto.
With gusto? Oh, she did. Gasp. So like this is a nice thing to see, like some growth from Lux. But that carries us over into the next part, and now we go back to actually seeing Akali.
Yeah.
Like, man, I feel for Akali in this part because they really do a good job of just being like, do I have a concussion? Have I lost my marbles?
Yeah, and just real quick, I wanted to say that, additionally to that part with Lux's shift in behavior, out of all the parts we've done, out of all the episodes, all the content we've covered so far, that was the first time where she actually behaved like Ari. Like, this wasn't, not her being in her own head or saying I'm not good enough, whatever. This was her in a situation that's very stressful, doing something that we could see Ari doing. And I think that's really cool and on purpose, right? From the storytelling perspective.
Right. Like, it's mentioned a lot that, she reminds the more veteran members of Ari. So like, it's like, okay, you did it. You acted like Ari. And it's just refreshing to see that, she's not constantly just an over anxious high schooler. So it's like, you did it. Yay. Go, best girl.
Yeah, so then we get to, like you said, the next part, so lovely horrors, which is the perfect name for this thing. So a collie comes back to her senses and she mistakes Sarah for one of the enemies because they look very similar. Then she kind of kicks her in the shin and runs off through the crowd. Because remember, they're still evacuating this whole mall on what's most likely a weekend. Uh, and she heads for the city center, right? Because she's going back where she came from originally. But what she ends up seeing on the other side of the crowd stops her in her tracks. And she mentions the confusion of like, why is it staying as dense as it is instead of it thinning out the further you get out? And it's because people are running away from the city center. And then when Sarah finally catches up to her, we see why. And Hatch, I think it's probably best just to read out this description.
So a collie heard Sarah catch up to her, but it didn't matter anymore. Not when the once unbroken skyline was now fractured under the weight of falling stars. But they couldn't be stars. Some were made of darkest night, others glowing embers. They zipped across the twilight sky, changing course midair to crash down without warning. Where they landed, corrosive purples, pinks, and blues blossomed. Buildings collapsed, only to be swallowed by fathomless black holes that winked like all-seeing eyes. Now Akali knew why there'd been so many people. They'd been running away, not just from the mall, but from this. It was terror. It was madness. It was pretty, Akali said to herself.
Yep.
So, yeah,
So
we've been talking a lot, like at our previous parts, especially with how standoffish Akali has been to not Akali, how standoffish Ari has been specifically to Lux, and it's because there's this mention of like, hey, the more Star Guardians that are around, the worse it's gonna get. Like it's the the brightest light will create the darkest darkness. So yeah, this is kind of what we've been alluding to up to this point of just like you get enough Star Guardians together, something cataclysmic is going to happen. And we now have like the first Avengers movie from the Marvel Cinematic Universe happening in this town.
yeah, exactly. And there's three references I want to point out. Obviously, the two closest ones are the episode where we talked about the park incident and how weird and awkward that was, with Zoe kind of portaling jellyfish monsters in. The music video that we've been referencing from last episode that gives you an idea at the end when she's interacting with Nico and she takes her in this other dimension type situation. It kind of looks like that. And the final one is, you guys are nerds just like we are. If you've played World of Warcraft, the Shadowbringers trailer, when Sylvanas cracks the helmet and the sky opens, is also the first thing that came to my mind outside of that. So that's kind of the visual of what these normal people are now seeing at the city center of one of the major cities in, Runeterra. So that's where we are. And then Sarah, still kind of in the mode because she is a Star Guardian, not as shocked by what she's seeing, tries to bring Akali to her senses and convince her that, we're still some of the good guys, right? Ignore what's going on. We're the good guys. Trust us. Come with us. And it turns out that Akali heard the whole back and forth between her and Zaya. So she wasn't much just stunned. She was actually paying attention to everything that was happening in that moment. And all of a sudden, a large purple fire erupts blocks away from where they're at. And Akali thinks that's where Kaisa was the last time they talked about 30 minutes ago. And she takes off in that direction, even though Sarah knows, oh, that's Syndra. Akali doesn't know that, but she immediately takes off because in her mind, she doesn't leave friends behind like they do.
Like they do. Yeah. But I mean, it does kind of help put in perspective, Akali's mindset up to this point is because, hey, the people that blew up the flower stand that I was standing at and have given me this concussion have been saying your name, which means they know you, which means you know them, which means you're not friend. Like, it's pretty simple. So at the very least, we understand what's happening there, but it is like it does give like a nice little like dilemma for Misfortune here, which is, do I go and help Syndra because, I like my friends are still fighting, like the friends I've left behind at the mall are still fighting Zaya and Rakan, and Syndra is clearly fighting something because I can see her familiars going to town on stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like I need to go in this direction anyways to help Syndra, but I also need to help this kid who keeps kicking me in the shins and thinks I'm a bad guy. So we now have like a little dilemma of just like it's still not cut and dry, despite how excited Misfortune was to be back in a fight instead of stressing out over what's happened to Ari and what's happening to their team. So it's still all of these mental gymnastics she's got to go through.
Yeah, and this takes us to the end of the story here, and I just want to mention that it's when we talk about like the age differences, they're not that far, despite some being more experienced in this war situation when it comes to being a Star Guardian, some being more experienced in other things or being more confident, different personalities. But I really feel for Misfortune in this situation, right? Because this is a lot for even someone who would be an adult to handle, right? We've seen plenty of the Sentai genre where, grown adults that have to take on these world class cataclysmic events that get overwhelmed. And this is a lot happening, not because she wasn't in the right mindset to start. So
Yeah,
so
no,
think about
not
being
at
in your
all.
worst day and then all the bad stuff starts happening that's outside of your normal everyday life.
Yeah, like and I mean it's refreshing too, like because it's that whole concept of something you have to learn growing up, which is that you're not ever truly alone.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things you struggle with are things that other people struggle with too. Like everybody has to learn that, and it's nice to see this point of the story from Misfortune's perspective because her thought processes are a lot more similar to Lux than anything else. Like she's stressed out about why Ari isn't coming around, still stressed out about how sus Syndra has been acting all this time, and trying not to grow too close to Lux's team because I know how it feels to lose people. So it's like, it's a very different thing because it's not like they're more difficult subjects than what Lux is dealing with, but she is just as shaken in her confidence as Lux is. So it's nice to get that. But I mean, the best part of this whole first chapter is just, finally getting these other characters that we've been seeing in the music videos and in a lot of the art, specifically Rakan, Zaya, and Zoe, which we don't really see Zoe at this point, but Misfortune name drops Zoe, so we know that it's like, okay, cool, they are finally coming into the story, and that is only just going to keep me more excited to keep reading on here, because this is just our version of part one of a 3-part thing to cover this story.
Oh yeah, we got much more coming. So with that, once again, if you've made it to this part and you've listened through all this, thank you again. We enjoy you hanging around when we go through this, and thanks for listening as always. And we'll be back soon with, as Hetch has said in the past, the next Stardian episode.
Let's go Stardians. I hate you, Ryan. All right. Take care, everybody.